The reason that you don't know about it is it's being kept away from you. The same reason why we are shadow banned on Google. So the US government couldn't confess to all of that without acknowledging that the ETs exist. So that's why they're saying we don't know who's doing it. Given what I'm doing now, what we're doing now, someone would have killed me, so I had to have that protection.
Okay, so this is going to be a lot for some of you to take in. This interview basically goes way beyond anything that we've heard from any whistleblowers or people from the government up to this point. So my hope is just that you'll listen with an open mind and let us know in the comments what you think. So without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Courtney Brown. Hello everybody, welcome back to Watch Mojo and Unveiled. I'm your host Rob, and I'm back again to dig a little bit deeper into the UAP disclosure that is happening currently. There's been a lot of news, so I'm very excited to speak with today's guest, who is Dr. Courtney Brown, a mathematician and a social scientist who teaches political science at Emory University. And independent from his work at the university, Dr. Brown is a leading scholar in the field of remote viewing and the founder of the Farsight Institutue. So, Dr. Brown, I'm really excited to speak with you about this. These are some fascinating topics. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Great.
Maybe you could get us started by just telling us a little bit about your background. How did you get into the field of remote viewing, and maybe even just define what is remote viewing for anybody who may not be familiar with it?
Remote viewing is a mental process. Many people in the casual conversations call it psychic, but it goes way beyond that because it's very highly structured if it's done well. But remote viewing is a perceptual process that uses the mind across time and space. The U.S. military originally developed remote viewing procedures that were used for espionage purposes. It was very successful, but when they realized it was going to come out, they wanted to keep it out of the mainstream. They wanted to keep it out of mainstream science in particular. So they released some remote viewers that they had been working with into the public and allowed them to teach. And that was the goal, to keep it within the New Age bookstore fringy community so that the mainstream science would stay away from it. I, however, saw it, and I actually interacted and saw, people like two-star generals and other than that, interacting with this. So I knew it was real. I had already gotten my tenure. I'm a mathematician that works within a social science program. So, but I don't do anything dealing with remote viewing or UAPs or anything like that at my university. There I teach math and other courses in a social science program. But outside of that, I work with the Farsight Institute. The Farsight Institute, or just Farsight, Farsight, is the absolute largest and biggest, best venue, because it's the only venue where you can get full public projects that actually show what the remote viewing process is all about. So when I learned the military approach to remote viewing, I wrote two books, actually one book using it exactly and another book modifying it. But it worked. It was very interesting, but I wanted something that had more structure to it. So we developed our own procedures at Farsight that were derivative of the original military procedures, and that's what we use today. But to give you a basic idea of how remote viewing works, everybody has the capability and potential, but there's a reason why people don't do it naturally or automatic. I can get into that at some point. But I have a pen here. So when you're looking at this pen, you're looking at it through the ocular image of your eyes going into the brain. And then the neurologists, the people who study brains, found out that it's as if it's being projected literally onto a layer of cells that act like a screen, like a movie screen, a layer of cells in the brain, this picture, and it's very bright. Now, if I take the pen away, but I say bring it back in your memory and you remember it, you can still see the pen in front of me, but it's more translucent. It's not as bright and solid and opaque as this one, but you can still see it in the memory. Well, the remote viewing image is dimmer, foggier, fuzzier than the remembered image. So there's three levels of perception. One is through the eyes, that's bright, hard, opaque. One is memory, same type of thing, but not quite as opaque, translucent. And then the remote viewing stuff. Remote viewing is something that we have researched the science of it a lot. I wrote a book about it and some articles and things like that, but this is my book, Remote Viewing: The Science and Theory of Non-Physical Perception, which explains the physics of it. And what remote viewing is capable of doing is transferring information across time and space, because all humans, all life is a composite thing. So we have a non-physical part and a physical part. The non-physical part is who we actually really are. We don't use the word soul or spirit. We use the word isbe, someone who is for the purpose of being. And the isbe, everyone is an isbe. You are an isbe. I am an isbe. We animate these physical bodies that are just devices. They're just biological devices. They're not who we are. We humans normally think of themselves as the real thing, as the body, but the body is really nothing. So there's a reason why the humans have this very weird perspective of who they actually are. But that's a longer, more complicated story. But the basic idea is when we saw the original military stuff, I wanted to develop something better. Now, one thing I do want to say up front is that we have had actual direct extraterrestrial contact since I was a kid. This is not something new, but we kept it secret and we didn't let anyone know until January of 2022, when the extraterrestrials told us we had to do everything public and we had to come up completely everything. So the procedures that we use now were helped by the extraterrestrials themselves. I tried to modify the original remote viewing procedures of the military, and I just didn't get it. Like, I couldn't really make an advance on it. And the ETs were the ones who actually nudged us, like a graduate student mentor relationship, told us what to do, and they became much better at those procedures. So that's true of the entire Farsight thing. So Farsight is who we are. We are the largest, I can say the best, because we're the only place where you can get full public projects. We have our own streaming service called FarsightPrime.com, which is totally equivalent on a technical level to Netflix, Hulu, Disney, Paramount Plus, whatever you want. It's got the largest collection of full remote viewing projects that you can find anywhere. When we do remote viewing, we have our own studios. They're really good studios, actually, top of the line cameras and everything like that. We use green screen, we use special effects, the whole thing. But the point is, all of our remote viewing is done under totally blind, scientifically defensible conditions, and it's really fun to watch. So it's cinematically fun to watch, but at the same time, it's totally defensible with respect to science. Everything is done totally blind. We use what we call instrument blinding protocols, which we consider better than blind or double blind. And what we do is we have these sessions where the viewers do their work. We don't actually use paper and pen, but that's what we say, paper and pen. They actually use tablets. So we're a paperless company. But you can call it paper and pen. That's what they used in the old military days. So they use paper and pen first, and then they continue their session as a last step on video, and using really interesting things like $6,000 plates of optical glass in a black environment where it looks like they're writing on space in the middle of the universe someplace. It's really good. Plus we use green screen, but all of the work is done totally solo and blind for when they're on the video. When they're on video, not only is it solo and blind, but there's nobody else in the studio. Period. I mean, the doors are closed. It's just the remote viewers. So when we do projects, we have multiple people doing the same target. So what you get to see is 4 or 5 completely blind sessions where they're totally corroborating each other. They're all seeing the exact same thing, which is very persuasive. And then what we record is what we call the target reveal afterwards. So you get to see the remote viewer when they're told what the target is finally after everything's been recorded. And you can see their reactions, which is, what? Are you serious? That was what it was? And so it's very believable. So that's Farsight. FarsightPrime.com is our streaming service. That's where everything is. That's where the mother lode is. But we also have our website, farsight.org, Farsight is two things. It's a movie business, but it's also a nonprofit educational and research institute. So farsight.org has a lot of materials relating to remote viewing, including paper, descriptions and things like that of that. So we are also, I can actually sort of, if you want to call this proof, I can sort of prove that we're the only place that you can get the really conk stuff is because we are totally shadow banned with Google and YouTube.
That's usually a good sign, isn't it?
Now, if you do remote viewing, if you search for remote view, first go to our website, farsight.org, so you can actually see what you're looking for, farsight.org. Then go to Bing, the search engine for Microsoft. So first go to our website, farsight.org, then go to Bing, and then search for remote viewing. We'll come up like number 3. They usually have Wikipedia and Gaia first, and then Farsight. Then go to Google and search for remote viewing. You won't find us. Now, how can, and all the other search engines were like number 3. How can, or on the first page or second page, no matter what, we're always near the top. So how can it be possible that we can be number 3 on Bing and not found at all on Google? When we run, of course, the Google performance search console, so we can actually track how we can actually see how the shadow banning is working. And we saw that in fact we weren't being listed at all, period, for years. And then they started to talk about it on podcasts. And so at that point, they started to reappear. We started to reappear as a result of me talking about it. And they were placing us at around spot number 100, which is which is about 10 pages down. But then there was one person, and we actually found the person. He was from New Zealand, who was trying to find us. And the process is first go to farsight.org, so you know what you're looking for, the Farsight's website. And then go to Bing, and then you'll see us. We're right at the top. And then go to Google, and you'll see we're not at the top. You can't find us. But this guy kept on trying to find us, and the Google AI is adaptive. It's not like passive where it just gives a listing. It was actually able, and we showed it. We had graphs and everything. We showed it actually following the guy, checking as the guy kept on going. And as it was searching, it knew that it was searching for Farsight. It picks it up like with your web browser. It picks it up like where you were last and so on. And as he kept on clicking, it kept on moving the spot down, down, down until it finally stopped at spot 250. So that's 250. I think it was 243 to be exact. So that's about 10 spots per page. So that was at the bottom of page 25. And it finally stopped there because it could see he kept on, we actually found it was a guy from New Zealand, and he actually communicated with us afterwards. So we actually found out who it was. But he was trying to find it to demonstrate it to his coworker, and the Google AI was actually adapting and staying one step ahead of him as it finally stopped at 243. So that's how it works. That's how shadow banning works. No other remote viewing group or set of people or anything is shadow banned at all, period. Nobody gets shadow banned if they're not doing squat, if they're not doing anything. The only reason people get shadow banned is because people in the powers that be, the authorities, don't want you to find something. Mind you, now if you do a search for Farsight, of course we come up at the top. But the interesting thing is Google knows perfectly well that Farsight is remote viewing. In fact, if you search for Farsight or Farsight remote viewing, it's very clear that it does associate Farsight with remote viewing. And again, none of the shadow banning happened before June of 2022. It happened on that specific moment. So, but that's sort of, if you're a conspiracy theorist, that's the proof that you need that we're the only place that you're really finding good stuff, because, it's important stuff, because that's the only place that someone like the most powerful search engine on the planet keeps you from seeing. And it knows perfectly well. It's literally impossible for us to be number 3 on Bing and all other search engines and not found at all on Google. So something's obviously there. So we have a strong educational mission with regard to teaching remote viewing, with regard to knowing what it's all about. But also we have a huge mission in terms of showing people how it's done, so they can watch the entire process, so they can actually watch the people describe their data and the projects that we have. We have way over 100 projects on every possible topic that you can imagine. There's nobody that understands the concept of remote viewing or telepathy better than what we have, and it's all public. We have no secrets. So it's a really exciting time to be watching both the extraterrestrial phenomenon, but also remote viewing.
Definitely, there's a lot to unpack there, but I want to take things back to the military practices, the history and the origins of this, because you mentioned that this goes back decades. It was used for espionage, but what were the practical purposes of remote viewing? And this is with the knowledge that there are tons of declassified documents that are very easy to access online about the CIA, the government using remote viewing practices and other similar like psychic phenomena. They've detailed these things. There hasn't been admissions that we've used them for XYZ. Most of them have been like failed experiments, so to say, or presented that way. But to your knowledge, what have been the most prominent practices of remote viewing and other such abilities within the military dating back to the beginning?
Well, the U.S. military was involved in a number of different processes for doing this. The most well known is individual sort of approaches to remote viewing. That was done, for example, by Joe McMoneagle. And then there was also the sort of a standard process which was developed by Ingo Swann called CRV, or controlled remote viewing. And that was in the very early days. And the actual steward, person who is sort of the granddaddy of the CRV process right now, is Lynn Buchanan. And he's a great guy, and he's on our board of directors, in fact. So we really love how he handles the CRV process. It works great. It's perfectly fine. And it was done back in the early days, and it's he preserves it. He's made some modifications of it, but he preserves it in its essential form. However, for what we do at Farsight, we wanted to do different things with it. So the military remote viewers were being used for espionage purposes. That's why the military invested money in it. Now, what you can get is documents saying that the unit existed. In fact, one of our former, he is no longer with us now, but he died quite a ways ago, was Michael Duvall. And Michael Duvall was one of the top 5 people in 2 presidential administrations, both the Nixon and the Ford administration. He was one of our board of directors. And he actually went and talked to some of after he actually became associated with us and learned how to do our processes and so on. He actually went back to his friends in Washington. I'm not sure which ones are still alive now, so I'm hesitant to name them, but they're famous people that were around in the Reagan administration. He went back to these people. These are like the very most famous people in the Reagan administration type of things. He went back to his friends and he asked them about that. And like the former head of the Defense Department, he asked him about it, and it was very clear. They were friends. They were talking, and they said, "Oh, we have no problem with remote viewing. We have some issues with some of the former guys that left, but now we keep everything secret." But they were very, very clear with Michael that the remote viewing process was not something they were having any doubts about. So what you're not getting is what they did is they closed down the military unit, made it public, sent the guys into the New Age bookstore community, and hoped that would be the end of it. Then me doing it as a professor in a major university, and I was well known. I used to teach at a whole bunch of places like UCLA, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor as a mathematician and so on, in social science programs. That was not something they were expecting. So that was something new, and that's one of the things that sort of helped bring remote viewing into the limelight, so that people can if our work wasn't there, it would be very much suppressed or kept within sort of the fringe New Age late night radio type of area. But we do it, and we do also get help, as I mentioned before, from extraterrestrials, and that's the military used to. We had some communications in the early days. They used to be fascinated by that. They couldn't figure out why we were actually having direct contact. I mean, like real contact, like the ET is there, that type of contact. And so that was very interesting to them. Half of the military wanted us closed down, burned off the face of the earth, and other half of the military wanted us kept around and protected. So the reason I'm talking to you today is we've not been wiped off the face of the earth. The other half, so one half is keeping us around and offering us some protection. I can't prove that, but you should be able to put two and two together. Any major group that starts focusing on the extraterrestrial phenomenon or remote viewing typically gets closed down as soon as it starts getting anything large. They're really good at closing such groups down, but we're not, and they allow us to do what we're doing, and they find some value in it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be allowed. Also, we're given some protection from the extraterrestrials themselves, but that's another story. But anyway, that's sort of the long and short of the history of remote viewing. The military guys mostly are getting pretty old, and so they're sort of phasing out. But Farsight is filled with young people, strong, and they're the most experienced remote viewers that you can find anywhere, and highly trained. And we spent years training them using our procedures and so on. But anyway, you can see basically everything on farsight.org, and then you go to our streaming service, farsightprime.com, and also there's a lot on our YouTube channel, which is just Farsight on YouTube. So if you look for us on YouTube, you can find us, but you have to look specifically for us. If you just do searches for like remote viewing, it's not easy to find us.
I want to tie this in for our viewers to something that is being circulated right now, because this is a lot to handle. There's going to be some people watching this who have a hard time with this information, and so I want to anchor it into something that is being circulated right now. There is a military whistleblower named Jake Barber who has done interviews, or at least one interview with News Nation that was released recently. They released a full 3-hour interview where he goes into incredible detail about not only the recovery as a helicopter pilot. He recovered UAP craft many times, but he also goes into great detail about what he refers to as teams of psionics, people with psychic abilities within the military who can interact with non-human intelligence, who can interface with the spacecraft that they use. And I would like to get your feedback on that, because those are some claims that people have never heard before from somebody of his stature within the military. So can you give me any comment on that? What are your thoughts about his story?
Well, you're talking about a recent, actually, set of interviews done by Ross Coulthart on News Nation. That's one word on YouTube. People can find it. And Ross Coulthart has been probably the most aggressive UFO, UAP investigator that's out there. And News Nation is to be commended. They really give high visibility to these things, as well as being one of the most respectable, non-biased news sources on all types of topics that are out there. So this is bringing a lot of credibility to the entire thing. Now, with regard to the specific thing that you were talking about with Barber, Ross Coulthart actually interviewed a lot of people who knew him and were associated with him as well. So he was talking with, colonels and lieutenant colonels and various upper level people that were vouching for him and also had their own experiences within the military. And these are firsthand experiences. One of the complaints that was made with early whistleblowers that were coming out, like David Grush and Lou Elizondo and so on like that, were that they were talking about things that they had heard or that people that they had interacted with in the military, but they weren't people that had hands-on experience with the actual ET craft and so on. So that's what this new stuff is with Barber that you're talking about. He was an actual helicopter pilot that was sent to go to pick up the ET craft after they crashed, and that's sort of the next phase. Almost all of the remote viewing, almost all of the stuff that you're getting now in the news is focusing on the issue of, are we alone in the universe? These ET things have been going. If you look at the projects that we have on Farsight, farsightprime.com, for example, it's very clear that these ETs have been around and doing things for like thousands and thousands of years. This is not new. And when we are focusing on are we alone in the universe, we're basically focusing on a very basic, immature question of are they real? So what Ross Coulthard is really trying to do is to push past the are they real question. So once you fully accept that they are real, and also I should say that Ross Coulthard actually was interviewed by in another podcast. So it wasn't just him interviewing somebody else, but he was interviewed by Donald Trump Jr., which is the son of Donald Trump, who has his own very successful podcast. So you could actually see Roth Gosar really pushing Donald Trump Jr. on all of these things and coming out with everything. And Donald Trump Jr. seemed very familiar with the entire topic. So this stuff is starting to get to the very highest levels. So, but the basic question of are we alone in the universe? Do the ETs exist? You have to understand how primitive that question is and how difficult it is for Ross Coulthard and others to push past it. Because as soon as you accept that the extraterrestrials are real, the next question is who are they and what have they been doing here all this time? So that's the big question that's being not asked. So if you look at David Grush, for example, and Lou Elizondo, it's always focusing on do they exist? It's never asking what have they been doing, but there have been hints. For example, with David Grush, he was always talking about David Grush as a is a Pentagon guy who has been given official permission from his office in the Pentagon to do the congressional hearings that he's been doing, the public stuff, the interviews, and the congressional hearings, both private and public. Down the hall in the Pentagon, you can get another office that says, we don't know anything about that. There's no evidence of anything being extraterrestrial or aliens whatsoever. It doesn't exist. We don't know what he's talking about. So the Pentagon, the military is clearly split. One side of it is giving him official permission. He's never stated anything in Congress that he wasn't given permission to state from the Pentagon. So part of the Pentagon is giving him permission to talk in these hearings, same with Lou Elizondo, and then the other side is in total denial. So that's the split. The Pentagon is not monolithic. It's got different groups, and for various reasons they have trouble with each other. But that's the two stories. So what you're getting now is finally movement away from people who have been talking to people who have been involved in this stuff, and you're actually getting whistleblowers who were actually the people that were physically in contact with the extraterrestrial stuff. And that's what this Barber interview is. So that's the difference between David Grush, who talked to like 40 or 50 people who were involved in hands-on stuff, but he himself was not involved in the hands-on stuff. Now we're getting to the point where we're actually interviewing whistleblowers who were actually on hands-on stuff. And in case of Barber, he was the helicopter pilot and he actually picked the stuff up and took it to, and so on. So one of the things that you get with everybody who's hands-on with this is that it's a tremendously mental phenomenon. For example, Barber, when he got close to a disc-shaped craft that he was assigned to pick up and take to a secure location, there was a lady inside. There was a person inside. And that person was communicating with him telepathically. And it was a very emotional part of the interview that you see with Ross Coulthard, where he was describing what was coming from this lady who was inside this craft. So the idea of mental communications is really important. We have, of course, at Farsight, gone way beyond all of this, which is one of the reasons we're still doing this. The military gets a lot out of what we're doing because we have actual direct physical contact with the extraterrestrials. And one of the things is that all communications are telepathic. All communications are telepathic. They don't use words like German or English or Portuguese or French or Spanish. They use mental communications, and the mental communications are as effective as any other type of communications. And this is very effective inside the ships when they have multiple species communicating. So if you have somebody who's a commander of a ship telling somebody else of another species, we need to fly the ship that way, they don't say that like, okay, can you navigator, can you have us go in that direction using these coordinates? he just mentally states what he needs to have done. The navigator picks it up immediately without any confusion whatsoever, knows exactly what to do, and the ship goes off in that direction. So these types of communications are what we do. If you want to actually see this process, when they communicate, it's like clear as a bell. When humans are trying to communicate telepathically, it's very difficult. Now, there's a new thing that's come out called the telepathy tapes. It's a new documentary, and it's also very interesting. It has a person at Harvard that's working with it, and it's a very good thing. So if you see the documentary or any of the YouTube programs about it, what they've been doing is working with autistic kids whose physical brain isn't working so great, so it doesn't have the ability to sort of dominate the process. And then they're demonstrating that those kids have absolutely clear telepathic capabilities. Their telepathy works so well because the physical brain doesn't work so well. But those kids can literally tell you letter by letter of what other people are reading or looking at. The telepathy is not in the slightest bit ambiguous. It's as clear as looking at something with your own eyes under totally controlled conditions. So that's a very good thing to start with, looking at the telepathy tapes project to see sort of how that works. So you can sort of ask, which I'll go into a little later, I think, not right away, is why humans don't have that capability normally. But the ETs do have that capability. Farsight is somewhere in the middle between normal humans that don't have any of that capability and the ETs themselves they rely on telepathy as their sole means of major communication. Now, some of them in their different special groups can use vocalizations, language, and things like that. For example, there are groups that speak German, things like that. But in general, any type of cross-species communication is telepathic. And when you're dealing with these ET groups, you're dealing with huge levels of species, and all of the communication is telepathic. So, but within the large groups, there are people among subgroups that actually do use some vocalizations and language out of habit or whatever. But but basically speaking, telepathy or psionics, as you're talking about, is important. Now, what you're talking about with regard to psionics is something that was discovered, that people who are telepathically, mentally talented can actually draw in the UFOs and actually get them close, and then, and so on. Now I have to raise the issue that is the big gorilla in the room. How is it that these ET ships in the crash retrieval program that David Grush and Noel Elizondo and others have been talking about, and now you said Barber, he was actually physically involved with picking them up. Why are the ships crashing? Now, these ET ships are capable of flying across the entire galaxy to get to us. Now, are they crashing because they didn't drop into Pep Boys and get the oil changed? Is the motor breaking? Why are they crashing? So what's actually happening, and that's not being covered in any of the congressional hearings. They are saying that the ships are crashing and that the U.S. military zips out with people like Barber running helicopters and picks them up and takes them to a secure location. It doesn't say anything like what happens to them after. It doesn't say what happens to the people that are inside them. And it also doesn't explain why they're crashing in the first place. Those ships are very capable of not crashing. There's a reason why they're crashing. The different groups within the extraterrestrials are very complicated. Now, we at Farsight we have one agenda, which is to push for full disclosure so that humanity and your audience can eventually hear all of this and have it all come out. It's basically, we're really pushing for it to happen this year. But there's a fundamental aspect. Why are they crashing? They are crashing because there are two basic groupings of extraterrestrials interacting with Earth right now. We call them the good guys and the bad guys, or the good ETs and the bad ETs. The bad ETs, from our perspective, have literally written agreements with the United States government to help reverse engineer some of the technology in the crashed ships so that the United States government can develop their own advanced tech in what they call the secret space program. Now, that aspect of the written agreements, if you know anything about what's going on, is not in dispute. And if you want to use Google, Google Haim Eshed, Haim, second name Eshed, Eshed. He was the former CEO, the top guy in the Israeli Space Directorate for 30 years. He gave an interview that he thought he was going to be able to get away with in Hebrew in a Hebrew publication, but he didn't realize how many people understood Hebrew, and it was immediately translated into a zillion languages, where he actually talked about the written agreements and the interactions with both the Israeli government, but also the some other governments, but specifically the United States government. And he talked about the written agreements between these groups, between the ETs and the U.S. government. The trouble is that the groups that made the written agreements were wanting the U.S. government to actually have that technology because they are in dispute with the other side of the ETs that we call the good ETs, which are the ones that we interact with. And there is a soft war going on between the good ETs and the bad ETs. And the bad ETs have the interactions with the political elite totally locked up. But the issue is that the U.S. government wanted that weapons tech. Now, the good ETs are trying to help us and help in the disclosure movement so that can be fully blown out and people can finally hear what's actually been going on. The bad ETs cannot shoot down the good ET ships to try to, because they basically run Earth. Bad ETs basically have the whole hierarchy of the political elite locked up. They want to keep that way for various reasons that I can get into if you want. But the bad ETs cannot shoot down the ships of the good ETs without changing the soft war into, or I call it a cold war into a hot war. And they don't want to do that. Neither side really wants to change the Cold War into a hot war. However, there is nothing stopping the bad ETs from giving the tech to the Americans so that they can use it in their secret space program and then let the Americans shoot down the ET ships, the good ET ships. So all of the crashes, or most of the crashes that you're hearing about, that David Grush and the Elizondo and Barber are talking about, are crashes of my side, the ships that are my people. They are the good ETs. And they're being shot down by the American secret space program. Some of the shoot downs happen with facilities that are on the ground, and some of them happen with facilities that are in space. But the issue is that one of the ways that they lure the good ETs in is with these people who use psionics to go into a deep mental state, ask friendly and ask for guidance and get closer. And some of the ships actually get closer. And when that does happen, whoop, they can get seduced into a position where they're trapped. Now, the good ETs could defend themselves easily. In a matter of seconds, they could knock out the entire American secret space program. So it's not a matter of can they not defend themselves. They don't defend themselves because then the American government would then say, oh my gosh, they're the aggressors. They're knocking out our ships, which we so much need. We need that high tech, that weapons tech, and they're knocking them out. So that would then throw the American government further into the hands of the bad ETs. It would be very self-defeating. So the good ETs are allowing themselves to be shot down. And that means there's a tremendous amount of sacrifice that's going on. You have no idea how much torture happens to the survivors of those crafts. So people like Barber take the craft and takes it to a secure location, but the people in the craft get given to the bad ETs. And you don't even want to know what happens to them. And these are my people. These are people that I've been interacting with my whole life. These are people I know personally. And you're supposed to know about this, and you don't know about it because of the secrecy that's involved in the entire thing. So right now you can say, this is crazy. This goes way beyond my pay grade. Why should I be told about this? Could this be even true? And you're still stuck in the question of, do the ETs exist? Just get past the question of whether they exist, and then everything else I'm talking about makes total sense. If they exist, then they've been doing stuff. What the heck have they been doing? That's the question. Now, we have projects going back thousands of years, going back to the early religions of Ra, Zeus, the whole thing, Hathor, all that stuff. We have projects on Moses, I'm Jesus. I mean, we have projects on things going back, and all the way to the current time as well, including a lot of other projects that are dealing with archaeological questions, political questions. All of that can be found on FarsightPrime.com. The reason that you don't know about it is it's being kept away from you. The same reason why we are shadow banned on Google, an active attempt to keep things away from the masses. It hasn't affected Bing and some of the other search engines, but the biggest search engine is quite clear as day. They don't want, the powers that be don't want you to know this stuff. That's what the fight is all about right now. And make no mistake about it, it's a war. And it's going to turn into a hot war, but currently it's a cold war. And my side is making tremendous sacrifices to get it to the point where the only thing we want is disclosure. We want humanity to simply know what the whole situation is, and then people can make a free will decision of what they want to do. And if they want to associate themselves with the bad ETs, my side will go away. And we'll say, it's your decision. You made that decision. But you can't make the decision if you don't know the information. So we're not trying to control you. We're not trying to, change the way the governments work. The only thing we want to do is to say, tell the people the truth. Let them know and let them make their own decision. My side, if you want to say anything, is a free will fanatic side. My side, they don't like me calling them free will fanatics, but they essentially are. They won't do anything to help or do anything with anybody unless the person agrees to it. It has to be a choice of free will. The bad ETs are exploiting that. The bad ETs don't give a damn about free will. So the bad ETs are exploiting that. That's why they're giving the tech to the American secret space program, letting them shoot down the ships. And this should be quite obvious to you. How can a ship be good enough to travel across the whole galaxy to get to us and then crash as soon as it gets here? You should put two and two together. That's like impossible. And you shouldn't doubt that that happens because we have congressional hearings on that now. And you don't have congressional hearings about something that doesn't exist. And you have the people coming out one after the other. And Ross Coulthard and the others, there are others. There's a guy called Baker and there's Barber, the other people that have had these direct contacts, these direct interactions. So anyway, Farsight has been protected and we have been guided by the good ETs as an attempt to produce a library of information dealing with all the questions that people are going to ask after they get past the do the ETs exist question. Then as soon as they get past that, they're going to say, well, what's been going on? They have to be able to go someplace to find out what's been going on. And that's what the Farsight library on FarsightPrime.com is. When it turns on, in the sense of when people get directed to it, it exists now, but at some point there'll be millions and millions and millions, maybe billions of people wanting to see all those projects to find out the questions. When that happens, that's the only source that I know of right now that will answer the questions that people are going to have once they get past the question of, is this real? Do the ETs exist?
There's been decades and decades of secrecy on this. Why is this information starting to come out now?
The good ETs have been pressing. The bad ETs want this place to be totally locked down. If you look at how the bad ETs operated things when they were just left by themselves and the good ETs were not involved, you have to go back to the pyramid building days of Egypt when you had everybody chiseling away with rock. And the pyramids were built with ET tech. There's no other way those blocks could have been cut and placed into spaces. Anything you hear from archaeologists saying that they used, logs to roll the blocks on, that's crazy. I mean, those blocks some of them are 80 tons, and they're cut with a precision that you can't stick a human hair in between them from quarries that are zillions of miles away and brought to the place and placed specifically in those spots. We could not make the Egyptian pyramids today. So, it was made with ET tech at the time. And we have, of course, a project on that. That one's totally free on YouTube, and that's called the Great Pyramid of Giza. And you can actually watch what actually happened to make that thing. So then there was some military conflicts between new ET arrivals that didn't like what the bad ETs were doing. They ran this place as a prison. Long story short, there was a huge galactic war. You might call it a large galactic holocaust that was worse than anything that's happened on Earth. And it's over now, mostly. The two sides are not actively fighting anymore. But at that time, Earth was set up as a prison. And that's what was going on. And then, more recently, about 1,500 years ago, there was some, actually it started back in the actual pyramid building days, so it was happening early. There were some conflicts between good ETs that were coming by and saying, this is crazy, this is ridiculous. And they disrupted the bad ETs from operating the way they wanted, which is a complete slave society that worked with rock. And the bad ETs started to do work behind the scenes, manipulating things from behind, changing religions so that if the Greek and Roman gods, which had things going really nicely, didn't work anymore, then they modified Christianity to have saints and so on like that. They had a saint for every substitute. For every Greek and Roman god, you had a substitute saint doing something. And it eventually boiled down into religions that started out to be really interesting, but they ended up being, if you don't get down on your knees and beg for forgiveness, you are going to be burning in the fires of hell for all eternity, which is crazy stuff. But that they wanted this control mechanism over humanity. And then, there's been pressure from the good ETs who have been totally locked out of the power structure, the elite power structure. And so the good ETs developed a different approach. They require a free will choice, but you weren't getting that from the elite who actually signed agreements with the bad ETs. Again, Google Haim Ashed and read about it yourself. Again, he was he was the top person in the Israeli Space Directorate for 30 years. He's also a decorated general and now a college professor. But anyway, so the good ETs had developed a new strategy, which is if we can't get the free will decision from the elite, let's deal with the masses. So what they have been doing over a great many years is, I'll give you some examples. They've been dropping ideas in the middle of night when the script writers and producers and directors are sleeping in Hollywood. And when they wake up, they say, "Oh, I've got this great idea for a new movie," and now the good ETs are free will fanatics, so they're not going to force anybody to do it. But a good idea is a good idea, and the screenwriters think it's their idea, and that's where you got Star Wars. That's where you got Star Trek. That's where you got the Matrix movies. All the stuff coming out, a lot of the Ghost in the Shells, a lot of the high tech, interesting sci-fi stuff that you see coming out of Hollywood and some Japanimation and things like that came from the good ETs. So what they were doing is they were changing the ideas in the society, making the society ready for this open contact. If it wasn't for that, we'd be stuck way back in the dark ages. So all these ideas, they were being brought to the surface without the agreement with the U.S. government and without the agreement of the bad ETs. It was a revolution slowly percolating from below. We are now in a situation where disclosure has to happen now, not like 2, 3, 4 years. There is a constant pressure to close down whatever venues exist that are still open in social media. And 2 or 3 years down the line, everything's going to be chucked, stranglehold. It'll be choked off, and the good ETs won't be able to get any information through. So we had to wait until there was enough technology so that you could actually have an internet and you could have the spread of information, but it has to act before that the dark forces have a chance to get complete control of that. And that's what, for example, that's the type of thing when you see Telegram, the exec for Telegram, Pavel Durov, he was arrested. He was seduced to go to France, being told he was going to have a lunch with Mitterrand, and in fact, I'm sorry, with Macron. And in fact, that's not what happened. He got arrested as soon as he got off the plane, and they want a back door into Telegram. When Telegram was in Russia, Russia demanded a back door, so Telegram left. They went to Germany. They went to all sorts of countries. They went to the United States in the Bay Area. Every single place they went to, the country's security people went to them and said, we want a backdoor into Telegram. Then they went finally to Dubai, and Dubai said, you can operate without a backdoor. So what they had no alternative, they seduced him to go to Paris. He has dual citizenship in Paris and in France. They seduced him to go to Paris and immediately arrested him. And the whole idea is they're trying to, and of course there had to be some compromises. He's got out of jail. So they're trying to control social media. TikTok, for example, that was controlled by ByteDance in China, and they were saying publicly, China is data mining and finding out information about or spying on American consumers. Wake up! Every single company in the world is spying on American consumers. Google, they're tracking every little click that you make. There's nothing that no one's not spying. The data mining is so totally complete. What they're really talking about is that they don't have any control over TikTok. TikTok is putting things out that the powers that be have no control over, and that's what they're worried about. So they want TikTok to be sold off to some other group of investors who are dying at the bit in order to buy it because it's such a valuable property. But then once it's sort of controlled and operated here, then they'll allow a back door. Then they can control TikTok. So that's the constant cascade that you're going to get 2 or 3 years down the line. So its disclosure is now or never. So my side has been pushing for it now. Now what happened is on November 13th, we actually have meetings, like we call them ET board meetings, with say 6 remote viewers people and 2 extraterrestrials. And we record those at the insistence of the ETs themselves. We record, the ETs are very specific. They told us what cameras to use. They give us advice on all types of stuff. They give us time to set up everything. They might make sure everything's recorded. They want no secrets, which is hard because they demand the highest quality cameras. We have to learn how to use the cameras and how to use the mics and everything. Okay. So we have meetings that happen once a month. At their insistence, they're recorded. On November 13th, for example, they told us, record it, and we published it. They said that they're going to start showing ships, small ships, in large numbers all over the place. They're not going to be using any stealth tech, so you'll be able to see them with your naked eye, and you're going to be able to record them on video. And they told people to go out and start recording them. That was on November 13th. On November 15th, we published it. We have 6 cameras. We've got 6 mics. It takes a couple of days to get it together. On the 15th, we published it. On the 18th of November is when the drone stuff started happening, blowing all over the place. And the U.S. government was seriously rattled. So badly rattled that at one point, the Pentagon officially told a congressman, I hope I can say this without laughing. I laugh at it so much. But they told a congressman, it came out on Fox News, but he said, I got it from the highest source. This is an Iranian, I'm sorry, an Iranian mothership using Chinese tech that is launching these drones off the East Coast. An Iranian mothership, no less. Anyway, that was that was as bad or worse than the original swamp gas explanation that they gave a long time ago. Anyway, that Iranian mothership story lasted for about 2 hours. And then the Pentagon spokesperson, the lady, came out and officially said, no, that's not what's happening. So they threw that out as soon as they realized that just wasn't going to work. So more recently, they have been pivoting, and there's been some more sophisticated releases trying to say it's a Chinese mothership that's using Chinese tech to let Americans know that they could get anywhere, any place. Okay. Well, the Chinese have no motive for sending these drones that are coming out in huge numbers. Some of the drones are actually U.S. drones that are actually using ET tech, part of the American Secret Space Program, and they're clearly searching for something. But a huge number of these things are actual ET ships that we announced were going to happen. The meeting has on November 13th. We published it on the 15th, and on the 18th is when the drone thing exploded all over the world, everywhere all over the world, over Africa, over Asia, over London, and then you have it over restricted airspaces. And these ships, they stay up for, normal drones can stay up for 20, 30 minutes. These drones stay up for 7, 8 hours, and everybody can see them, and you can actually see them, and they're actually video recordings of them shooting at each other. So sometimes there's disputes between. There's clearly ET stuff going on at the same time. So that's what's really going on right now. The drone stuff is still occurring. The next meeting we had was in mid-December, and we published that. And the big message from that was that the ships are going to become bigger ships. Now, the actual drone stuff is actually still ongoing, but the powers that be have managed to push it off the front pages, so to speak. So it's not being reported as much. But the actual drone footage that you get on on Instagram feeds and things like that, they're there as much as now as they were before. The U.S. government ones are clearly looking for stuff, and that started also after we at Farsight started to publish remote viewing projects dealing with threats to domestic security, big threats with big stuff. They're looking for weapons of mass destruction, missiles and things like that. And so some of that is going on right now. So the U.S. government couldn't confess to all of that without acknowledging that the ETs exist. So that's why they're saying we don't know who's doing it. You can imagine the U.S. government, officially Pentagon, saying we don't know what it is. We don't know who's flying them. That can you imagine them actually getting to that? The only reason they were saying that is they desperately didn't want to tell people what those actual things were. Anyway, getting back to your original thing about psionics, mental stuff is everywhere. That's how the communications are with the extraterrestrials. So if you think of it in terms of layers or levels, humans have almost no telepathic capability. We at Farsight have a in between, a medium level, and then the ETs are an extreme level. So when you watch the ET board meetings, which we publish at the ET's insistence every month, when you watch the Farsight people interact telepathically and interpreting and translating what the ETs that are at the meeting are saying telepathically, you get an idea of how humans work with telepathy. So it's not like we're just like the ETs on the ships where the telepathic communications are clear as a bell. It's like somewhere in the middle, but it's not degraded like you get with humans on the basic level, but it's clear that they're receiving messages, information, and each person is chiming in, adding interpretations to the message. This is what they're saying. I'm picking up this, that, and the other. So you can sort of see that. And it's a nice way to sort of see telepathy work with people who are telepathically capable, but maybe not at the same level as the ETs themselves, which would seem like, crazy amazing, but not so degraded as you get with normal humans.
I have so many questions. Something else that Jake Barber mentioned was that some people have a predisposition for psychic abilities, and he mentioned Native people, people in third world countries. What is the reason for that? He also mentioned that women and actually gay men have a higher level of capability, generally speaking, for telepathic communication. Is there a reason for that? And the second part to this question, can this type of skill is it a skill that can be learned by anyone, or is it something innate that we all have or don't have, and there's nothing that we can do about it?
Differences that you're going to find with different groups are all dependent upon the culture. Some cultures are just simply more open to the intuitive ideas coming through, so they don't throttle it down. They don't stop it as much as before. But this is basic for everybody. So let me explain why the telepathic question that you're asking is being asked in the first place. This planet has been run as literally a prison for thousands of years. And how is a prison run? It's a prison by it puts people in the prison and it doesn't let them get out of the prison. Now, it's a psychological prison. It's not a prison with bars, but that's how advanced prisons in the galaxy are operated. What happens is we don't use the word soul or spirit. We use the word ISB. Everybody is an ISB. You're an ISB. I'm an ISB. Everybody's an ISB. And an ISB is someone who is simply for the purpose of being. Now, you cannot kill an ISB. You cannot kill a person. You can kill the body, but you can't kill the person. The person's ISB is the real person. You can not kill an ISB, but you can deceive an ISB. You can lie to an ISB. You can trap an ISB. You can enslave an ISB, but you can't kill the ISB. So it used to be in the galaxy that death was a means of transportation. Someone dies and then they say, okay, I'm getting out of there. If it wasn't a nice place to be, and they go someplace else. However, how do you stop that in places? Now, if you remember the former Soviet Union, people used to try to get out of the former Soviet Union. Ballet dancers like Rudolf Nureyev and Mikhail Baryshnikov, they had to escape during times when they were walking between aircraft and like on a Paris airport. They had to run for help and ask for permission to be able to stay. So, totalitarian, authoritarian societies try to keep people in and not let people out. So, with regard to authoritarian, totalitarian groups within the galaxy, it would turn out to be the same way. They would lose their entire population. Every time a person died, they would just go someplace else. So they had to stop that from happening, and that involved technology. So what happens is when somebody dies, the normal process, in fact, the normal process elsewhere in the galaxy is when you die, it's not a surprise. The body simply stops functioning. You pop out of it, and everyone can still see you. You can see them. You don't lose your bank account. You don't lose your car. You don't lose your wife, your husband, your spouse, your friends, or anything. Everybody knows you're still there, and you can get another body, or if you feel like it, you can go from the beginning and be a baby again, but you don't lose that stuff because everyone knows that the body is not you. So why does that not work here on Earth? Because this prison system has been set up with extremely advanced technology. You have to understand, we are talking about civilizations that have been around for like 1 million years, and everything that can be invented has been invented. Technology is not the cutting edge of science out there in the galaxy. The cutting edge of science is social science, trying to figure out how societies can operate in new ways of societies developing in the galaxy. But what we have now is a situation where you die. Physically, the body dies, and information has been kept from you while you're alive as a physical being. So you die sort of ignorant. And then as soon as you die, you see the light. You've heard that story? Well, that's true. You see the light and you get drawn to the light. It's like a magnetic pull, very warm, embracing light, and it pulls you in. And then if you start to resist it and fight it, it's like being stuck in a fly trap. The more you resist, the more you get stuck. And it draws you in. And then once you're in, you get zapped with a lightning, essentially a high voltage bolt that's way higher voltage than, say, a lightning bolt. You get zapped with a high voltage shock, like shock treatment. And you can't be killed, but you can be rattled. And what happens is you lose your memory. You lose your telepathic capabilities. You lose your remote viewing perceptual capabilities. You're just stunned. And then an AI comes out. You've heard this story before. An AI comes out and says, you're a very important person. And we've been talking about your case with the Council of Elders. You see the Council of Elders over there? Yeah. Well, we have been thinking, the arguments you used to have with your mother? And your daughter has been sort of, she's got some troubles going on, and then the communication you had with your husband was not the best, and your wife was thinking that, remember what happened with your father at the show? We think that you could work on a few of the personality issues just a little bit more, and we think if you went back and just sort of struggled and worked on these personality issues, you could really become sort of perfect. But it's up to you. It's a free will. You can decide for yourself. Well, without memory, without telepathic capabilities, without perceptual capabilities, you inevitably say, sure, sounds good to me. I'll go back and work on a few of the fine points of my personality, and then you go back in. So when you see the light, that's tech you're looking at. You're looking at tech. You're not looking at God. It's technology. And so that cycling back and back and back is what keeps everybody here. It's extremely difficult to get out of that situation. However, And the technology itself is very difficult to dismantle, but you have to both find it and you have to then dismantle it. So that, and you're talking about very advanced civilizations that were able to put it up, and they obviously didn't put it up in places that could be easily found. That would defeat the whole purpose. So they designed it so that even advanced civilizations would have trouble finding it. So that's what actually is going on. That's why the entire human population is so dumbed down with respect to telepathy. They get born here and they're still stuck. They're still shocked. They don't have their telepathic capabilities or their remote viewing capabilities. So some cultures encourage more open interaction with intuition, but it has nothing to do with genetics. Some cultures are just a little bit more open to that. The remote viewing process, however, can be trained to anybody. And you saw with the telepathy tapes, the project that's come out, you have autistic kids that are very severely mentally, you know, set back, yet they have perfect telepathic capabilities. So one of the, when you're, I'll give you another story. One of our remote viewers is someone called Yeme Genet. And I met her when she was a model, and she was a nude model that artists used to gather around and draw sketches, and photographers used to. And she was blind, not completely blind, but legally blind, and she could not read something that was written unless she brought it within 2 or 3 inches of her eyes with these huge, thick glasses on. So she could not see she was beautiful. She was a nude model. And she had, artists and photographers surrounding her all the time. She had to develop her telepathic skills to survive because she couldn't tell by looking at people that they were good people or bad people. So she had to use these telepathic skills. Well, I realized that if she could be a remote viewer, she would be a star because she looked great and she was great on camera. The only problem is she couldn't see, but otherwise it was great. So we started to work with her and teaching her remote viewing. Her telepathic skills were just right off the scale, just like with the autistic kids. I mean, with the telepathy tapes, you can see that project. So her telepathic skills were right off the charts. And then we took her to a doctor not too long ago, like a few years back, and she had a very expensive eye operation. And she has better eyesight than you or me or anybody I know now. If she was an eagle, she'd be able to see the prey a mile away. I mean, she's really great now. So, and we paid for that. We paid for her eyes to be fixed. And, all right. So what happens now is, though, because she already had those telepathic skills, she didn't lose them. So now she can see, but she can also read minds like that. So, that's the type of thing. It wasn't because she's African American. It wasn't because of her skin color. It wasn't because of, what her sexual orientation or anything like that. It's because she was blind and she needed to rely on that. And she developed those capabilities, just like the autistic kids developed these capabilities in the telepathy tapes project.
I would imagine that our Western lifestyle doesn't encourage anybody or very few people to explore developing these capabilities. What do you have to say about this, the way that society has kind of developed in the modern world, and the way that these ideas are not generally accepted by the masses and kind of pushed aside?
It's by plan. They're trying to do it. This is a suppressed understanding that is suppressed all on the level of governments all throughout. People, the authorities, which ultimately, remember, the bad ETs have direct interactions with the elite. They don't want people to know this. And when they knew the remote viewing capabilities were going to come out anyway, they released some of the remote viewers into the public with the understanding that they'd stay within the New Age bookstore community. They'd stay fringy and it wouldn't get into the mainstream. That was the whole purpose, to keep it out of the mainstream. But at this point, all of the major governments that have anything to do with anything know that it actually can exist. And now the ETs are trying to push the thing forward. Now, as far as the big ships are concerned, it started, but there's going to be some bigger ships. It hasn't really fully happened, but it's in the works. They said the next big stage is big ships. And then on the January meeting, they said, now we want people to try to communicate with us. They said, basically, obviously, if we're out there with, thousands of ships and we're letting people see us, we're obviously trying to communicate with people. So now we want the people to try to communicate back. Now we want them to lose their fear of us because they can see us, but now try to communicate back. And they said anything will work. We'll be able to pick you up no matter what. And not pick you up physically, but pick up what you're trying to do. Just wave. Put a banner out like you go to a football game. Put a banner out, paint on a sheet. Sure, wave the sheet. Anything you do, we'll notice. Try to communicate back. And then for the people who are wanting to get a little bit more advanced on this, learn how to meditate. Quiet the mind and listen. If you quiet the mind and listen, you'll hear us talking to you. Now, what's going to happen when the bigger ships come up, people are going to be gathering around, and the good ETs want the interactions to happen, and they want the communication to happen. Now, one thing I have to really emphasize, Rob, is the following. The ETs have told us point blank that Farsight is not supposed to be an oracle. We are not supposed to be the ones you come to and say, everything that comes through Farsight is good. You have to go through Farsight. It's not like the Pope. They are trying to establish communication with everybody. So what we're trying to do is act as examples for what everybody else can do. The best possible outcome would be for Farsight to be obsolete, for everybody to do what we do better than what we do it. But the worst possible outcome is to think that everything has to be through us, that we're the juggernaut, everything comes through. That's the idea of control. That's what the bad ETs want. They want to control everything. We want to break the control down. So the idea is the messages, the bad ETs want the communication to stop. The good ETs want the open communication. They have been locked out of communicating with the elite, so they say, let's communicate with the masses. You've seen the drones. They don't like calling them drones, by the way, but you've seen the small ships. They fly around. Now they really want to emphasize that bigger ships are coming. There have been some bigger ships that have been visible. You can see them on Instagram pages, but on reels and so on. However, there's bigger ships coming, like big ships. Now, I'm not talking the really big ones like the size of the state of California or larger, but clearly very big ones that you can see that's not a drone. So they're coming, but the step that's before that is now it's communication. So this telepathy stuff you're talking about, or the psionics that you're hearing Barber talk about, that's what they want to get started. And any level to start with is okay. Waving a sheet with some words on it like you're at a football game, waving your hands, quieting the mind, listen, anything will work. They're trying to communicate with you. And when the big ships come, they want people to gather around. They want people to get underneath and nearby and try to speak with them, try to communicate. It's got to be this gradual process. And it has to happen soon. We're talking like this year. It can't happen 2 or 3 years, because in 2 or 3 years, all the social media is going to be choked off and they won't be able to get through to you no matter what. Everything they won't be able to get. The idea is we have to get to the masses. In 2 or 3 years, we won't be able to get to the masses. So you won't be able to get anything. Like, look at the stuff you get in mainstream news. It's garbage. The stuff you get in mainstream news is like ridiculous. It's not, you're not getting anything real. The interesting thing about some outlets like News Nation on YouTube is they're pushing the agenda. They're getting more stuff out with fewer controls. And that's why you have people like Ross Coulthart appearing in News Nation. You have to say, well, why is that not happening with CNN? Why is that not happening with MSNBC? Why is it not happening with Fox? So the issue is that there's going to be fewer venues where it's going to happen in a few years if disclosure doesn't happen now. So that's what we're trying to do. This year is the big one.
Somebody else that Jake Barber mentioned is Stephen Greer, who is a big voice in the UFO UAP community, and one of his big things is his CE5 protocol. That's what he calls the basically meditation groups that can invite UAPs to present themselves and have interactions with them. It sounds like from the things that you said that you subscribe to the idea that that's a thing that's possible and that actually happens, right?
It is possible. I have my differences with Stephen, but it is possible, and he's doing a great thing. He's doing a great issue. He's these CE5 things is a valuable thing for people to go out and try to have those types of interactions. On the other hand, the differences that I have with them is he absolutely insists that all the ETs are good, that there's only good ETs out there, and that's simply not the case. That it's as above, so below. There's a mixture. And I really don't like talking about what other people do, so I hesitate to actually comment on what Stephen does. But I like to look at the good side of what he does, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the basic idea, he does try to have some sort of telepathic contact with these ships and sort of bring them in. All that's very good. But on the other hand, it's a very different story that he's telling about what's actually going on. He presents the evil side as mostly the military-industrial complex, the U.S. government, the people that's humans that are trying to throttle all of this, and that if you can just get past that, all the ETs are good and it's the government is bad. That's just not right. That's just not right. The government is divided and the ETs are divided, and there is a war going on. Right now it's a Cold War, but it's going to burst into a hot war at some point. And that's what you get from the Farsight stuff. You get, and also the procedures for communication are very advanced now that we do at Farsight, and we show people how it's done, and we give examples of it working, and you actually can see it in the process. You're going to see these ships, the big ones, those are actually coming, but you're going to have to get past the idea that the galaxy is just filled with loving. Actually, if a lot of the channeling community, for example, we just came out with a major project called the ET PsyOps. A lot of the channeling community presents the ET phenomenon as the whole galaxy is filled with loving fuzzy wuzzies that are so anxious and waiting for humanity to lift their head out of the sand and embrace their loving brothers and sisters out there in the galaxy and join galactic life. That's propaganda that's being spread by the bad ETs. It's not like that at all. And they're always kicking the can down the road. Full contact, open contact in 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years, in 5 years. It's just kicking it down to a point where the social media can be so tightly controlled, there'll be no free open contact. So these are, a lot of these channels, by the way, the channels themselves are beautiful people. They're some of humanity's best. But the channels are like you're a car. You're leaving the ignition open, the ignition on, you're leaving the key in the car and the windows open. Who's going to take your car? Is it going to be a good person, or is it going to be some kid that wants to jump in your car and take off? It'll be a bad person. So the point is that these channels are very open to manipulation. And you're dealing with societies that are millions of years old. You're talking about extremely advanced extraterrestrial societies, and they're not going to miss an opportunity to be able to influence humanity through a zillion channels. Some of them are very famous channels. They're not going to miss an opportunity like that. And they're going to come in and they're going to start spewing out sort of a party line. And the party line is almost always the ETs are all good, and disclosure is open contact is just a few years away. And that's, and then there's also some other things that happen. They start giving information that seriously distorts what actually has happened in the galaxy. The bad things that have actually happened in the galaxy. They tell you truthful information, but it's always mixed with lies as well. So it's very hard to get the truth out of the channeling community because you don't actually know who you're talking with. Now with remote viewing, it's different. We are not giving our bodies and minds over to somebody, some other ET that comes in and occupies the body and then talks. We are in full control of ourselves, where we do remote viewing in the full waking state. We're actually communicating and we're actually perceiving with our own stuff. So no one's controlling us. And then we do it under blind conditions, and we have multiple remote viewers going in under totally blind communications. They're not communicating among themselves, and they totally corroborate each other. That's very persuasive versus somebody just telling you all the ETs are good, the bad people are in the military-industrial complex. Like, why? Who told you that? Why? Why do you know that? You know, there's no reason someone can. You just can't say something like that. You have to show. You have to have raw data and look at it. And I don't see any of those people having any raw data to be able to demonstrate anything like that.
When was your first contact experience?
I've been dealing with these ETs since I was born. The difference between myself, my son, and some others is that we came here without being processed through the death traps, which is the amnesia processing stuff that I talked to you. We call them the death traps, whether you get bolted, you get shot with a bolt of lightning and so on, you lose your memory. So we came in here and we were able to regain our memories of who we are and what we're doing. And so I've been dealing with the extraterrestrials since I was a kid. I would have been killed immediately if I wasn't protected. So when I was growing up, I had, you know, the so commonly described grays with the wraparound eyes.
Yeah.
I had two on my left and two on my right when I slept every single night. They didn't bother me. They didn't abduct me. And this wasn't stuff I dragged up through hypnosis or dream recovery or anything. There was just two on my left and two on my right. And they told me not to tell my mother because it would worry her. But, you know, they were protecting me. And, you know, they were friends, and this is way before Whitley Strieber wrote Communion. This is way before anybody was talking about the Greys. So they were there all the time. And I mean, I couldn't go to sleep without, someone would have killed me. Given what I'm doing now, what we're doing now, someone would have killed me. So I had to have that protection. And then all throughout life, they would be telling me things to do. I had to be born from a human mother. My son had to be born from a human mother. We had to go through the human educational system. We're humans. We had to go through the whole 9 yards. We couldn't just be flown in and dropped into Times Square and then start talking. We had to come through the grind. But normally people don't get here unless they actually come in as prisoners. So we had to go through the whole thing. But then I had to recover all my memories, and then I had to also be told everything. And so they've been telling me what to do since I was a kid. And then with Farsight, it's gotten to the point where we actually not only were given advice, we were told when to get a studio, where to get the studio, what kind of cameras to get. I mean, and then when it got to be a point when we were supposed to tell people how to make video recordings of cloaked ships, there's cloaked ships all over the place. They're mostly flown by the bad ETs because they don't want you to see them. So they wanted us to know about the cloak ship. So they sent somebody, a very nice person, Lincoln Lounsbury. He was the lead air traffic control person in the Reagan Airport in Washington, D.C. That's the big one, the international one. So he was the guy, he was the lead traffic control person. He's published in the aviation journals. He's also been the traffic control person in the towers and a bunch of other major airports. Anyway, he came to us. Now, he didn't say he came from the ETs, but it was clear without him. Anyway, it was clear from our perspective, it was very unusual. He came to us in this very studio I'm talking to you right now. We have, if I turn the camera around, you see there's monitors all over the place. He came here with Excel spreadsheets, video examples. He told us everything that needed to be done to make recordings of these cloaked ships, because he was air traffic control person in Washington, D.C., and he showed us stuff that was flying over Washington, D.C. That's the most highly restricted airspace in the world. And like, he's the air traffic control person. He was showing us all these ships. He told us what cameras to buy. He told us where to send the cameras to get them converted into infrared, the whole 9 yards. We just had to follow the instructions. Now, we already had we were already guided to use, been told what to use. We already had Panasonic cameras. GH5, so we just had to upgrade to Panasonic GH6s because they had to shoot at 120 frames a second because the ships travel so fast you can't capture them at 30 frames a second. So we had to upgrade to GH6s, which could do 120 frames per second. And then we had to send them to a particular conversion place called Life Pixel, which converted them into infrared cameras. And they did it in a special way. Every camera has a sensor, and the sensor has a filter on top of it that screens out ultraviolet and infrared. So that's what you normally want when you want a good picture. But that sensor had to be taken off, and nothing had to be put in its place, and Life Pixel was the place that did that. So we bought the J6s, we sent them out. Then I set them up on my deck, and my son is Aziz, he said, Dad, just follow exactly everything that Lincoln Lounsbury told us to do. Follow exactly what he did. So we did it. I got 15 minutes of coverage. I went down and I put it into Adobe Premiere and started looking at it. Within the first 10 minutes, I had at least 30 UFOs that were clear as day, flying right over my goddamn house. They were as clear as day. They were swooping down. One was the size of like half a city. I mean, one was here. I mean, all these things we were seeing, and they were traveling. Then Lincoln came in, and we had a show that we had on FarsightPrime.com called Identified Flying Objects. He would come in and look at all of our footage, and because he was an air traffic control person, he could identify the speeds that these ships were flying at, and they were flying at 20,000 miles an hour, which is 32,000 kilometers an hour. That's how fast. You could put the Titanic flying over your house. You wouldn't see it if it's flying 20,000 miles an hour. So, and they were like all over the place. And then we had a field day, and we were like making recordings of ships. I went down to a Blue Angels show. Lincoln told us that the UFOs really love air shows. I don't know how he knows all this, but he knew that they love air shows. So we went down and I watched the Blue Angels air show in Pensacola over the Pensacola Naval Air Base. I'm not talking 30. It was hundreds and hundreds of UFOs that were totally invisible in visible light. You couldn't see anything. All you could see was the Blue Angel jets flying around. But in the cameras that had been converted, and we were shooting at 120 frames a second in infrared, they were so many. It was like Times Square up there. It was like all over the place. And if you want to see some of these things, I started putting some of them up on my Instagram page, which is Courtney Brown Farsight, all one word. Courtney, my name, Brown, my name, Farsight, Farsighd. And you can see a lot of these, including, I could even share my screen and show them to you now, but it's so easy to find them. Just go to Instagram, Courtney Brown Farsight, and you can just see a whole bunch of them. So the issue was, we became well known for showing people how to take video recordings anywhere of these ships that were all over the place, but they were all using stealth tech. So what happened in November is the ETs that we work with says, now we're going to start using our ships, but we're not going to use the stealth tech. We want you to see us. And that's what changed. And now what's coming is some larger ships. So when I'm talking larger ships, I'm talking very significantly large ships, like very visible, and not that flying across so you can barely see them if you blink, that you'll be able to stand there for hours and just sort of look at them. You're going to see that type of stuff. And that's what the bad ETs desperately don't want to happen. So that's the Cold War that's going on right now. But that we had to get to a point where the stuff that came out with Farsight was visible, could be publicly accessed. But now you get an idea why Google shadow bans us. This kind of stuff they don't want, and why the other search engines don't shadow ban us, because they've not been put under the thumb. But the shadow banning of the depth that we have more banning on us than you get out of, when presidential candidates used to complain that they were being shadow banned on various social media. The amount of shadow banning that has occurred with Farsight is way beyond that. But we're still growing. We're going despite all of that. And clearly everyone knows that we're the largest and biggest venue for remote viewing anywhere. So it's the cat's sort of out of the bag, and the ETs are sort of pushing it.
Dr. Brown, I think we've just scratched the surface of this topic. I wish we had more time to talk, but I just want to leave you with one final question, which is, do you have a message for the average person who is just now being exposed to information like this and trying to grapple with it as it changes their reality? What do you have to say to people who are new to this information?
It's very good to have a positive outlook. Understand that this place is being occupied or run as a prison, but that the cavalry has arrived. We are really trying to change things. So the best thing is anything that comes out of the mainstream, don't trust. But information is going to start coming out where you're going to be given truthful information and be open to it. Know that the good ETs totally are really good. They have your good interest in mind. And what you should be looking forward to is learning to differentiate between the different sides, the good and the bad. And so that you can then say, well, who's actually trying to give me the information, all of the information? And the best possible last message to give is enjoy the process. Have fun. This is not supposed to be a scary time. This is supposed to be oh my gosh, this is an interesting time. Finally, information is getting to you that you've been asking for, that you have been wanting. So this process of openness, open disclosure, open information is something that people in the galaxy have been trying to get to you for a very long time. The show is starting now.
Well, I have certainly been enjoying the process so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else happens this year. I want to thank everybody who watched. Please don't be shy. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see more interviews like this and more discussions on these topics, please let me know. I'd be happy to feature new guests in the future. And if you have recommendations for who you'd like to hear from next, please let me know that as well. So until next time, take care, everybody, and be well. See ya.